By the way, throughout the Bible, whether you go to Isaiah for the woes, or you're in Habakkuk for the woes of Habakkuk, or wherever you deal with it, the prophet is telling people the truth, but the tears are running down their face as they're revealing the truth of what the choices that people are making. And it is judgment. This is light that's shining, and people are making choices. That's very critical. Mm-hmm. This is the setting for Matthew 24. So it says in Matthew 24, verse 1, it says, "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple." So Matthew states it twice in case you don't get it. It's not just him physically leaving the temple. He's leaving the temple in terms of the presence of God is leaving the temple. This is no longer God's temple. This is no longer God's house. He's leaving it. He's never coming back. This is not God's house. And I'm sorry, but there's too many people today that think there's a building over there on the hill over there in Jerusalem that's God's house. That is not God's house. It hasn't been God's house since this day when Jesus walked away. It's not God's house. He doesn't dwell there. It's a building with stones. It means nothing. Jesus is walking away. The house is left to them desolate. It's their house. They want to play church. He lets them play church, but he's walking away. And this is what Matthew is trying to get our attention to by repeating the statement twice. He goes out and he departs from the temple. And this is when
a quick thought, Pastor.
Go ahead.
It didn't strike me as it had just now that when Jesus is announcing those woes, he's doing it as king.
That's right.
He publicly announced himself as king in the triumphal entry. So now when he stands before the Pharisees and the scribes for the first time, he's standing before them as king. And then he tells them their true condition, the woes. And that's the Daniel 10 experience, or the Isaiah 6 experience. Isaiah sees himself he comes before the king, and he falls down and says, woe is me. Isaiah recognizes his true condition, but the scribes and the Pharisees, they don't recognize their true condition, so Christ has to tell them.
That's right. That's right. And the same thing happens when he goes and cleanses the temple. He cleanses the temple the first time as a prophet, but the second time he cleanses the temple, it's as a king.
Amen.
And you see the parable of the wedding banquet in Matthew 22. It's the king who goes through to view the guests, to see who has on the wedding garment, who doesn't, and who doesn't. And the king determines whether someone is invited into the wedding, or they're thrown into the outer darkness. So all this stuff is kingly imagery. All this stuff is kingship stuff. And this is the point. This is exactly Christ's point, because salvation is a kingly function. Right? So it's the king who determines who's in his kingdom. And he's the one who determines who's not in his kingdom. And nobody else makes that decision. Only the king himself. So if you look at the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, or you look at the parables that we're going to look at in Matthew 24 later, it's the king who determines who's in his kingdom. He's the one who stands at the door. And they're knocking and saying, "Lord, let us in." He's saying, "I don't know you." And if you don't know the king, excuse me, then you're not part of his kingdom. You're not welcome into his kingdom. It's only those who know the king. So that's actually correct. All this stuff is kingly function. That's part of what I've been trying to share.
And that's actually because when he stood at the door and knocked, they didn't open and let him in.
That's right. That's right. Because just like the parable,
he says, "I don't know you."
That's right. So the wedding garment was freely given. It's a free gift. The gift of Christ's righteousness. His righteousness alone is the gift of the robe, the garments that we're supposed to be wearing. It's a free gift. He freely offers us his righteousness. All we have to do is acknowledge we have no righteousness of our own, and then we are receiving the gift of his righteousness. If I cling to the idea that I have some righteousness of my own, then I am rejecting the gift of his righteousness, the robe of his righteousness. So it's free, but it costs me everything I have, which is the paradox of the kingdom, right? So anyway, here in Matthew 24, as soon as he leaves the house, he just says it's desolate. Then it says the disciples came up to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And they say to Jesus, do you not see all these things? So they're showing him, Mrs. White talks about how they're showing him the beauty of the temple and the strength of the temple. And look, these stones, some of the stones, well, they survived the siege of Nebuchadnezzar and this wonderful temple, this beautiful place. By the way, Herod had beautified the temple. It was a beautiful temple. But the disciples don't get it. And that's what he says to them. He said to them, do you not see?
The fact that they're attending to that and they're trying to bring his attention really reflects their executive functioning in their frontal lobes. That they're completely blind at this point in time, but it speaks about their executive functioning, or I would call it disexecutive functioning, that they're not functioning here.
Right, you're right. Or dysfunction, right. That's right. Yeah.
Right. Could you call it a hardening of the heart?
Yeah, I don't. It could be if they continue down this path, but the point is, I think that disciples are actually innocently ignorant. I mean, they're clinging to what they've always known, but Jesus is trying to tear down that which they have clung to so he can build up that which will give them life. But like all of us, we're slow to let go of the things that we've been holding on to our whole life, or what we believed as true our whole life. We're slow to let that go.
Yeah.
Adventists are funny, we'll study with other people. We'll show them the Sabbath, even though they've been keeping Sunday for 50 years, or we'll show them the State of the Dead, even though they believe grandma and grandpa and all their aunts and uncles and ever in heaven. And we expect people just to throw away what they believe in 1 second and grab onto what we think is true and just kind of join us without any qualms. But ask an Adventist to let go of what they believe for 50, 60, 70 years and grab hold of something new, and watch how quickly they do that. And we expect
Amen.
something of others that we're not willing to do ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we tell people, well, they should be checking the Bible. They know which day to go to church. And they should be checking the Bible. They know what happened to you when you die. Oh, really? Well, maybe we should be checking the Bible to double check the things we think we're so sure about. Because maybe what we believe isn't true either. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I think the disciples, they're innocently ignorant at this point. They only understand in part what Jesus is saying. It isn't until he's crucified that their world falls apart, and that they begin to actually are willing now to challenge everything. There's nothing after the crucifixion of Christ and their great disappointment. There's nothing that they're not going to challenge. You're not going to say anything to the disciple, and they're not going to say, nope, I don't care what you say. I don't care what I believe. What does the Bible say? And I think that's where we need to get back to as Adventists. I don't care what I believe what the church has taught for 150 years. What does the Bible say? That's what I want to know.